Hey, DawgNation, this is Brandon Adams, the host of DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I'm excited about today's show. Interesting day in Athens yesterday. Kirby Smart meeting with the media, getting a chance to talk with one of the Georgia players, David Marshall. A lot going on after 4 spring practices. I had a chance to see some of that with myself there from the Classic City yesterday. So we got a lot on that. We'll kind of put to bed the whole discussion of, at least I hope we're putting it to bed, the whole discussion of the recent spat of player arrests for UGA. Tyler Simmons, Tyreek Stevenson, the latest on that. Kirby was very forceful with some of the words he used on that. We'll address that before we're done today. But we got some really fun stuff off the top. Next, Roquan Smith. That phrase was used in Athens yesterday. Big-time praise for an incoming Georgia freshman who's not on campus yet. It's kind of an exciting time. A lot of these young names around the Georgia program are really popping, really making some noise, and we'll address it all. Plus, Mike Griffith joins us, too, as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
What would Roquan Smith say to the so-called next Roquan Smith? I think that's an interesting question. I think we have the answer. We'll do that coming up later on today here. Great to have you with us on DawgNation Daily. Before I get to any of that, and before Mike Griffith joins us in a moment, too, to give us a first-person account of what he saw at Georgia practice yesterday, let me start with something completely different. If you're watching the DawgNation video channels yesterday, you may have seen the first of what is going to be a reoccurring video series around here. We're calling it DGD, a look at the best dang good dogs, darn good dogs, or whatever word you want to use, adjectives to describe that. Some of the greats in Georgia history, both on and off the field. And yesterday in the first in this continuing video series, we had a chance to talk to former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards. Now, y'all know I love Terrence. I have him on the program here on DawgNation Daily every chance that I get because Terrence was a great player. I love reminiscing about his career. His stats speak for themselves, records that still stand at Georgia, all-time leading receiver, only 1,000-yard receiver in the program's history, on and on and on you could go. But in addition to that, because as much as I love going down memory lane, there's also something really important about looking ahead to the future as well, and Terrence is good at doing that too because he's an individual wide receivers coach. A lot of these big-time names we talk about from the 2019 class that just finished, the 2020 class, that cycle that's ongoing right now. Terrence knows these guys personally. He works with them on a direct one-on-one basis, so picking his brain about what he sees from receivers, in addition to the fact that Terrence still loves UGA and hopes the Dogs get good receivers, Terrence's evaluation of receivers, I just think is really a great thing to hear. So I had a chance to talk to him yesterday on this video show. Many of you may not have seen it yet, but I at least want to make you aware of something Edwards had to say. I asked him, when you look at George Pickens, a guy that's not on campus yet, he's not going through spring practice, won't be here until the summer, but when you look at that guy, tell me what you see. And if you weren't already excited about George Pickens before, after Terrence Edwards says this, I think you'll be pretty excited.
I see a number one wide receiver. I see a guy that can put a team on his back when we need to play. If it's a screen, intermediate play, taking an option route, or a deep pass, when we need a play in a crucial down, I see a guy that be able to be physical enough to take the abuse from SEC defense along and making plays at the same time. That don't come along very often. So I think he's a guy that could be the next guy that could be a 1,000-yard receiver. He has the tools to do that. I don't know if he would, but I don't know if we're going to throw that much. But he has the tools to be the next receiver to come out of the University of Georgia.
Come on now, y'all. That's pretty exciting to me. Next 1,000-yard receiver, Terrence Edwards thinks it could be George Pickens. I particularly love the phrase when he says, hey, he's the kind of guy that can put the team on his back. And I do think that's one of the things that Georgia's been missing. And for those of you that listen or watch every single day, I know what you're thinking and saying right now. BA, we know you think that because you say that all the dadgum time on the program. I guess in this case, I probably have repeated myself a bit because that's how strongly I feel about it. And y'all know how much I wanted Pickens to be in this class, especially in that late stage build-up to February's National Signing Day. Was really, really hoping to see Georgia add him, and then somewhat maybe, at least from some perspective, surprisingly, Georgia was able to do that. But part of the reasons why I really wanted Pickens was because of the fact that I did think he potentially had that quotient of when it's a slow day for the offense, when quarterback's misfiring, or when defense is crouching towards that line of scrimmage trying to stop the run, trying to key on some of these really good running backs, when you just need to get out of a jam, when you need to create some energy. Well, George Pickens is the kind of receiver that can put this team on his back. Boy, I love that description when it comes to Terrence Edwards, a guy who knows this position well. And when Edwards, the only guy to ever catch 1,000 yards worth of balls at Georgia, says this guy might be the next guy, I don't know about you, but my ears perk up. I'm going to listen to that a little bit more. I'm also going to listen in carefully to the things that Kirby Smart says as well, because we know at spring practice right now, the ongoing competition to find replacements for 3 pretty big-time receivers departed from Georgia, it's significant. Terry Godwin, not there anymore. He's a senior. He's out of the program. Riley Ridley, McCole Hardman, 2 juniors that chose to leave early. What's the competition like? Well, Kirby Smart talked about this last week, and I played this for you last week, and I want you to hear this again because I do believe it's a reminder of not just how Terrence Edwards feels about Pickens, but potentially how Smart feels about Pickens and the other incoming freshman, Dominic Blaylock, here as well, because Smart just flat out says, I kind of wish those guys were here right now. It'd be great to have them here. So when you're thinking about that competition and what it's eventually going to be this summer, Smart's already told you, it'd be fun if we were already doing this with Pickens and Blaylock on the roster. In fact, here's what he said about that last week.
I'm really excited about seeing the new wideouts go out and compete and play. And unfortunately, there are no early guys in at that position, so we'll get to see a lot of them in fall camp. But there's a lot of guys who've been here that haven't had an opportunity to really go out and play at the forefront and being thrust to the forefront. So that's a big position of need for us, and we're going to get to watch those guys compete.
All right, so fair and balanced coverage here for a moment. Kirby says, hey, I wish those other freshmen were here right now. I wish they were going through all of this, and I'm the same way. I agree with Terrence Edwards that George Pickens, and you could add to that Dominic Blaylock, are 2 receivers very much worth being excited about. But as of right now, they're not here. As of right now, they're still finishing up their high school career, and expect to see them doing some big things for Georgia this late July, early August when those summer practices begin. So what's going on now without them? Well, Kirby Smart was good enough to provide us a bit of an update on that yesterday. Ironically, one of the guys that's been in the headlines for the wrong reasons, his name comes up here. But once again, even in the midst of this clip you're about to hear, Kirby Smart once again alludes to, hey, it's a competition right now, but just wait until the rest of the crop gets here. Another example, I think, of Kirby kind of alluding to Pickens, who you just heard Terrence Edwards talk about, and maybe Dominic Blaylock too. Listen for yourself and see if you come to the same conclusion than I do.
Well, ironically, Tyler Simmons has played well. He's really competitive. He's fast. He gets on top of us. He's done some good things. I think D-Rob stepped up. You know, D-Rob's got to continue to play more physical, but he's made some catches. He's made some vertical threats. JJ's playing well. Kier's is coming along, probably not as fast as I'd like. Matt has done some things, and Tommy's done some things. I think, you know, Matt's got some bumps and bruises. Tommy's dealing with some growing injury. The volume we have for the number of receivers we have has been tough, and you usually balance that with tight ends. Well, we don't have volume there. So we're thin, but we know help's on the way. We just got to do a good job developing enough depth that we feel comfortable with. They've made some plays. I definitely think that where last year it was like big play bonanza out there with the wideouts. We had the young DBs. That's balanced out more. So our DBs have gotten better, at least I hope they have, or the receivers are not as good a group right now as it was this time last year. And that's only going to happen through getting the kids here we signed and continuing to develop them.
So a lot to unpack there. First of all, I love the phrase big play bonanza that Kirby Smart uses, but you hear a couple of other things there. Hey, we're not going to be fully filled out at wide receiver right now, a little bit behind maybe we're a year ago, but that's going to take all the kids that we signed kind of getting here on campus. Now, it's worth pointing out that doesn't just mean George Pickens, and it doesn't just mean Dominic Blaylock. He's potentially also referencing Lawrence Cager, the graduate transfer from Miami, or tight ends like Eli Wolf and whomever else, Scyther, the other February signing who's going to be showing up. So this is not just the George Pickens talk, but you have to acknowledge 3 instances from those 2 audio clips alone where Kirby says it's a competition right now, but just wait and see what it's going to look like when the so-called help that's on the way actually gets here. So I am not going to really pump the brakes all that much right now on my George Pickens excitement. I do believe that the Georgia offense is already in 2018 among the best in college football. The stats speak for themselves on that. But there are also those occasional moments where you just sort of felt like a little something might be missing, a little dash of hot sauce, a little dash of flavor. And that wide receiver, that number 1 wide receiver, the way that Terrence Edwards describes him, is the the kind of guy that can potentially blow the top off a defense, to me, looks like that missing piece. Now, I can't promise you that Pickens is going to end up being that. There's not a huge track record of really great seasons for freshman wide receivers in the SEC. We'll have more on that coming up in just a moment. But I believe the evidence is there that makes a little bit of optimism and excitement warranted. Whether you want to choose Blaylock or you want to choose Pickens, I think there's some reasons to feel good. I think Kirby Smart's anticipating their arrival, and for me, that's plenty enough. All right, my name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. Live on video today, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed. We're on the radio at noon as well on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Had a good time on the morning show there this morning on 960 The Ref. Always love my friends in the Classic City. And we are available as a podcast pretty much wherever podcasts can be found, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Really great to have you as a part of our program today. We will get Mike Griffith in just a moment. I want to ask him, because Mike's got some particular insight on this for reasons that I'll explain in just a moment, but I'm going to ask Mike about the ability of a freshman receiver really breaking out and really making a strong contribution to Georgia this upcoming season. We'll do some of that with Mike and a whole lot more in just a couple of minutes. Before we get to that, let's go around the doghouse today. It's presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and I want to focus in on another conversation that happened in Athens yesterday. Listen, we're going on year 2 now of the end of the Roquan Smith era, the end of Georgia having a Butkus Award-winning middle linebacker, really an eraser for a defense. In 2017, Georgia wasn't always perfect defensively, but gosh, it was hard to tell when they weren't because Roquan Smith was always there to kind of clean up that mess. And in sports, we speak in terms of comparisons. That's just kind of the language of sports. We share big, bold opinions, and in a lot of ways, we're comparing one guy to another guy. That's just the nature by which sports fans kind of understand stuff. So there is this discussion of, can there be a next Roquan Smith on campus for the Georgia Bulldogs? Is another linebacker coming along that's going to do some of the things that Roquan Smith's going to do? Well, guess what? It's not just people like me and you, sports fans, that do this kind of stuff. Maybe sometimes Georgia players do this as well, because David Marshall, the currently injured Georgia defensive lineman, had a chance to speak to some reporters yesterday. He talked about one of the Georgia freshmen that he's noticing. He was asked specifically about Nakobe Dean because he'd said something previously about Dean in some of his comments yesterday, and he kind of goes down that same road of making that comparison. I think you'll find this interesting from David Marshall from yesterday.
I guess he's another Roquan. He speed, he fast. He's smart. More plays than most of all the other freshmen.
So listen, this is both fun and unfair. Nakobe Dean's barely gotten on campus, and you've already got people like me kind of pushing this next Roquan label on not just him, but really a lot of guys. As I said before, this is just the way that sports fans speak. And David Marshall, apparently, he's a sports fan too, so he's going to throw that comparison out there. Oh, it kind of reminds you of Roquan Smith, because when you see a linebacker flying all over the place, especially when he's got that Georgia G on the side of his helmet, that's just kind of what it's supposed to look like. But it's worth pointing out here that it's not just Marshall throwing around, praise without there being something to back it up. Kirby Smart also had some nice things to say about Nakobe Dean himself after having watched him now for 4 practices in a Georgia uniform. Here is some compliments that Smart also threw Dean's way as of late.
Number one guy who's done some good things has been Nakobe Dean. He's very intelligent, he's very instinctive, and he's going to challenge some guys, and he's got to continue to grow and learn.
So is Nakobe Dean the next Roquan Smith? Obviously, it's still way too early to tell, but there are a lot of guys vying for that next Roquan label. I have said before that until I see more of Channing Tindall, I'm not taking that next Roquan label off of him. Until we see more of that, I'm not going to do that. For now, it is still his label moving into a sophomore season to show if he's the next Roquan or not. But obviously, Nakobe Dean, the incoming freshman from Horn Lake, Mississippi, is going to generate that kind of excitement as well. So I was going to think of this morning, what would Roquan Smith say about all this? Roquan was actually at Georgia practice yesterday. What would Roquan Smith say about all these guys vying to be that next big-time playmaker in the middle of the defense at the inside linebacker position? What would Roquan say to the potential next Roquan? Well, luckily enough, We actually had Roquan Smith on DawgNation Daily a little over a year ago, and I asked him about that. There are a lot of guys who are going to be trying to be the next Roquan. What would you tell them about trying to be the next Roquan? And I thought Roquan gave a very Roquan-like answer to this. So picture in your mind Roquan giving this advice to Nakobe Dean, to Channing Tindall, and really anybody else who might vie for that title. Here is what Roquan's thoughts are on the next Roquan.
There's a lot of special guys back there right now. I'm looking for a lot of competition to be going on because all those guys have great skill sets. From Nate Trez, he's one of the leaders of the linebacker room. Then you have guys like Tate Crowder, Monty Rice, then Jaden McBride. There's a lot of guys there, man, that has a chance to definitely make some plays this upcoming year.
That's my bad. That's not the exact same quote that I thought it was going to be, but nonetheless, Roquan's one of these guys that is looking in on that, looking to see what that next Roquan's going to look like in a Georgia uniform. And I guess, to kind of wrap this conversation up and kind of finish my point on this, is that I do think if you're looking for a dynamic guy to emerge at that inside linebacker position, and Kirby Smart's been really clear, they need more speed from that group. I think Monty Rice, a great run-stopping linebacker, but they need that lateral quickness. They need that lightning quick speed that Roquan showed. I just think the challenges of playing this position make it more likely that it's going to come from one of those 2018 signees like Tindall, more so than an incoming freshman like Nakobe Dean. But turn the hype all the way up to 11. If a freshman breaks out on this year's team, whether it be a Dean looking like the next Roquan or a Nolan Smith, who Kirby also talked about yesterday and Chip Towers wrote about DawgNation.com, or any of these guys, then I think you have to say these are pretty special freshmen indeed, because this is a lineup in which it is just not easy to crack as a freshman anymore because of how talented it's gotten. This isn't 2017 or 2018 when Georgia needed freshmen just to fill out the full two deep. It's not that way anymore. It's a much deeper team now. So the freshmen that emerge are emerging in a much more challenging fashion that existed previously. So if Nakobe Dean really is a guy on the field making big-time plays for Georgia this season, maybe it's not so much that he's the next Roquan, but he's carving a path for himself that one day may even make him even better. That's at least something worth thinking about. It's Around the Doghouse, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Of course, Engineered Solutions of Georgia is the one to call if you have a cracked foundation or a damp crawl space, a wet basement. A lot of you doing, a bunch of cleaning right now, and you walk, you're going around, you see this wet spot over in the corner of your basement. What does that mean? Well, really the only folks qualified to answer that question appropriately are our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, because they're the only ones that have a full-time engineer on staff. Therefore, they're the only ones that DawgNation would trust. And the great news is they are very easy to get in contact with. The phone number couldn't be easier to remember. It's 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. We've heard a lot from Kirby Smart on the program already. We'll hear more from him later on, including what he had to say about Tyreek Stevenson and Tyler Simmons, their recent running with the law. We'll do that later on. For now, though, here on DawgNation Daily, let's get more on yesterday's spring practice. Let's catch up with our buddy, Mike Griffith.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Say hello to Mike Griffith. He had his eagle eyes on yesterday during Georgia practice, taking notes of everything going on. And then right in the middle of the fray when Kirby Smart met with reporters, and David Marshall there as well. And Mike, it's great to have a chance to chat with you here back again on DawgNation Daily today. We appreciate you so much making time for us. We hope you're doing well.
Thanks, B.A.
Let me start with something that I think you have some unique insight on, and I'll explain why I think you have unique insight on it. I started off our program today by talking about George Pickens and some of the things that former Georgia wide receiver Terrence Edwards said about Pickens yesterday. Pickens, as you know, is an incoming freshman wide receiver to UGA. He'll arrive later on in the summer, and I do believe, based on the things that Kirby Smart said yesterday and based on some of the things he said last week, that right now we are certainly in an uncertain time for this Georgia wide receiving core, and maybe Kirby really is looking to this summer when Pickens and Dominic Blaylock, the other freshman signee, arrive, as well as Lawrence Cage are there too, I guess, to a certain extent. But I want to keep this to the freshmen for right now, and I want to ask you about what you think the ceiling, the threshold is for a freshman wide receiver in the SEC. The reason why I want to ask you about this, I know that you are one of those guys that's heavily involved in the voting for the Football Writers Association of America Freshman All-American team. I was looking back at some of the guys that have won Freshman All-American in the SEC over the last few years, and you may correct me if I'm wrong on this, but going all the way back to when A.J. Green won it in 2008 as a freshman wide receiver at Georgia, we haven't seen a lot of other freshman wide receivers on this list from the SEC. Alshon Jeffrey did this at South Carolina. I think you've got 3 Alabama receivers who've done this. Amari Cooper, Jalen Waddle did this most recent year. Calvin Ridley did it as well. But over the course of the last 11 years, that's about it. Only 5 freshman All-American wide receivers from the SEC in the last 11 years. A lot of positions the SEC has had a whole lot more than that. So what are the justifiable expectations for freshman wide receivers? George Pickens, I guess, mainly included here. What's the justifiable expectation for a freshman wide receiver at UGA in 2019?
Well, I mean, you got to set the bar pretty low, number one, just because of the way Georgia spreads the ball out. I mean, Riley Ridley was your leading receiver this last year with, 44 or 45 catches for 500 and some yards, and that's a potential second or third round NFL draft pick. So, for starters, one, Georgia's predominantly still a run team. I do think they'll throw the ball more. But secondly, because Georgia runs a pro-style offense, Jake's pre-snap reads are predicated on what the defense is giving you, and not necessarily let's get it to player A or player B. So what the defense gives has a lot to do with it. A, B, the style of offense, the number of passes that you call has a lot to do with it. And 3, pace of play. Georgia's not a hurry-up-tempo team like a lot of these other programs, and thus they don't run as many plays. So you add all those 3 things up, and from an expectation standpoint, the numbers aren't that great. So if I tell you that if a true freshman has 20 catches for 300 yards, that would be an impressive season, you might not think so on the surface, but when you take into consideration, what the leading receiver will probably only have 44 catches, all of a sudden it looks a little bit different.
The only thing I'm going to push back on that and nothing that I think you say is factually wrong, but the only thing I'm going to push back on is something else that Edwards mentioned is his belief that a guy like Pickens is, quote, a true number 1 receiver. And I think, with all due respect to what Georgia had a year ago, I think that true number 1 receiver may have been missing. And frankly, Mike, and I know this is well-traveled ground for me, I think it's one of the reasons that Georgia hasn't maybe broken through to the tune of winning a national championship yet, because Clemson, Alabama, programs like that have had the true number 1 receiver. So you say, hey, you got to keep the expectations low because of the way that Georgia's distributed the football in the past. The fact of the matter is, Mike, I think some of the way that Georgia's distributed the football in the past is going to have to change for Georgia to do what it hasn't up to this point done.
Well, it depends on the personnel, Brandon. 2 years ago, they should have won the national title. I mean, they should have. They should have. If the defensive backs play their assignments, they beat Alabama, and we're not using that as an argument. I mean, when you got Nick Chubb and Sony Michel and Roquan Smith, I mean, let's face it, that was the best team in college football. They ran the ball more than any other non-option team in the country, and they should have won the national title if the defensive backs play their assignment. It's that simple. It wasn't a matter of not throwing the ball enough. It was a matter of a broken assignment by a senior. But to your point, as for this year, here's the question for me, DeAndre Swift. And you know that Kirby is going to be careful how he uses them, because this is a 15-game season we're talking about. We're talking about a national championship team. We're talking about a team that if they don't make the college football playoff, we're going to be disappointed. Forget the SEC title. If they don't make the college football playoff, we're going to be disappointed with this Georgia team. They're not going to make the college football playoff if DeAndre Swift is not healthy. Mark it down right now. He's the money guy. He's the guy you got to have. DeAndre Swift, in addition to running the football, Brandon, he catches the football really well out of the backfield. That's going to take some catches away from the receivers. Look, you've only got, one guy coming back that had more than 10 catches this year. It's not rocket science. You're going to lean more on these running backs to catch the football and the James Coley offense. You're going to see more James Cook out of the backfield. You're going to see a lot of DeAndre Swift catching the ball out of the backfield. You might even see more out of the tight end. No one's talking about Eli Wolf, but this is a guy who could fill Isaac Naugh's shoes, and Isaac had 30 catches last year. So, while these receivers you're talking about have potential as number 1, they've got to learn the offense. They've got to make the same read as the quarterback when they line up against the defense. It's almost like they got to have ESP. Jake and George Pickens have to make the same read on the cornerback, or Jake's going to throw the ball one way and George is going to break inside the other. And that's really what makes it hard for freshmen that come in a pro-style offense, is not only learning the playbook, but learning to be able to make the same reads telepathically as the quarterback pre-snap.
Let me stay on another freshman who's drawn some attention as of late. Kirby Smart talked about Nakobe Dean yesterday. David Marshall, the Georgia defensive line, mentioned Dean as well, and that next Roquan phrase gets used. And Mike, I said before you joined us that sports fans, me included, we speak in terms of comparisons. That's just how sports fans talk. This guy's the next Jordan or the next Tom Brady, the next whomever. And at Georgia, when at linebackers, that next Roquan phrase is going to be used a lot. I 1,000,000% understand why Dean draws those comparisons. I take very seriously what people said about him on the high school front, including John Rice Plumlee, the quarterback who ended up not signing with Georgia. But Plumlee, as much as anybody, can talk about those head-to-head matchups with Dean and what he saw from Dean during All-Star games and things along those lines. I mean, this is a guy that justifiably comes into Georgia with a lot of praise and seems to be backing up some of those accolades with his first 4 practices in a Georgia uniform. However, that said, if there's really a star that emerges at that linebacker spot for me this year, I am still a lot more likely to look to the 2018 class than I am the 2019 class. For me, it's still Channing Tindall until I see otherwise. We saw him get to the quarterback some last year. We saw him be on the field a pretty good bit. I think Kirby has said that you need more speed from that spot. I think he provides that. So if there's a relatively young player that pops this year, as much as I am very bullish on the future of Dean, I'm still going Tindall before I go Dean, at least for right now. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree, and I'd throw Robert Beal in that mix too. I mean, he was making some noise last year before the concussion on special teams, but no doubt about it. Again, another position you have to learn, another position that you can't be thinking. You've got to be reactive, and it takes time. I mean, look, you can't just go from high school to the SEC level. I mean, that's a very difficult jump. I mean, the SEC is, almost semi-pro football when you take a look at the talent level and the number first-round draft picks. And in the SEC, you're playing other teams like that every week. You're not Clemson. You're not playing these poor, pitiful teams, that would finish 500 in Mid-American Conference League, things like that. You're playing a real schedule in the SEC. You can't just load up on 2 or 3 games out of the year like Clemson can. So that level of competition, and it takes something out of you. A different level of training. And let's also remember this. We always sometimes forget this, and I can't state this enough, what these student athletes go through with their schedule. People just, look, at Georgia, it's real, okay? You really do got to go to class. This ain't North Carolina. You got to go to class at Georgia. You got to go meet with your tutors at Georgia. You got to go get treatment at Georgia because Kirby works guys hard. DeAndre Swift was going for treatment 4 or 5 days a week last year. Think about that. Think about if you had to take 2 hours out of every one of your work days to go in somewhere and get treatment on your groin or your leg. Imagine what kind of lifestyle that would be for 4 months out of the year. That's what DeAndre Swift was doing. The poor guy was exhausted all year. So, there's a lot, and these freshmen, this is all new to them. It's not just, go to school and then have an hour and a half practice where you're the guy and you run around and beat everybody. Now all of a sudden, you're competing against. So my point is, there's a lot more to a freshman jumping into an SEC defense or offense than just showing up and playing. It's a complete lifestyle change. I like what you said about Tindall. I totally agree. I liked what I saw from him. I liked what I saw from Beal. I tell you, the newcomer I'm looking at is Jermaine Johnson. Yeah. I mean, you talk about looking like $1 million. Now, here's a guy coming from junior college, so maybe the adjustment isn't quite as big, B.A. I still wonder how he fits in and how quickly he plays, but that's the guy I've got circled among the newcomers for immediate impact.
Let me talk about the offensive line for a moment. I thought what Kirby said about Jamari Salyer was really interesting yesterday. I'll invite folks to check out our video DN90, both at the website DawgNation.com or on the DawgNation video channels. You can see more of that. But in looking back on that, Mike, where, Kirby really talked about Salyer being an improved offensive lineman, calling him the most improved offensive lineman on this roster for right now. To me, that's Salyer catching up to the level of praise that Cade Mays kind of got a year ago, and I guess you'd add Trey Hill into that too. If we're going to assume for a moment that Hill ends up being the starter at center, and right now that seems like a fairly strong assumption, think about how interesting this could potentially be. Salyer, who right now, according to Smart's working at right guard and right tackle, that's a good level of versatility. Cade Mays, I believe, unless he unseats one of the starters, is kind of the version of that on the left side. He can play left tackle if Andrew Thomas were to get injured again. We know he can play left guard as well. We've seen him do that. Mike, listen, I'm obviously a Georgia fan, so maybe I'm overpraising here, but I don't know that there are going to be that many offensive lines in America who have a starting five that you feel good about, and then kind of a catch-all guy on the right side like Salyer trying to work his way into a starting lineup, and a catch-all guy at either left guard or tackle in Mays on the left side. To have two backups of the caliber of Mays and Salyer, with all due respect to any of the other offensive linemen I'm not mentioning in this discussion, but if that's your sixth and seventh man along the offensive line, that is just an obscene level of offensive line talent. Mike, I've been watching Georgia football for more than 30 years. There are a lot of years you couldn't combine 3 years' worth of offensive lines in Georgia and get that level of depth. If Mays and Salyer are backups, if Mays and Salyer are backups, that is a nice luxury for UGA to have.
It's the best offensive line I've ever seen. Of all the programs I've covered, undefeated Auburn 93, undefeated Tennessee 98 with Chad Clifton, Cozy Coleman, Michigan State's rules. I've the teams I look at every year in the All-SEC voting, this is the best offensive line I've ever seen. For the reasons you're saying. And Jamari, remember, he did not early enroll like Cade and Trey. So to your point, he is playing catch-up, and that was why he was behind. He is a talent. He's a massive human being. DawgNation, we had a chance to talk to him after the SEC championship game and do that video interview. I'm sure we could probably find that, probably should find that. Maybe I'll pull that up as I follow up on the story that you did this morning.
I also linked that into my piece of DawgNation, Mike, just so folks are aware. There is a link to your video with Jamari in that piece there as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I didn't know. Thank you, BA. But yes, they're going to want to see that and hear this guy talk, because this is not just a giant of a man. This is an intellectual. This is a really intelligent kid with his goals set high, and it's going to be hard to keep him out of starting lineup. But to your point, who do you take out? For goodness sakes, Andrew Thomas is likely a first-round draft pick gone after this year at left tackle. Thank goodness they have this depth, BA, because they may lose up to 4 players to the NFL draft. But at left tackle, Andrew Thomas, a first-rounder. We talked yesterday. We debated, Solomon Kinley, maybe the best lineman, had the best season last year of all the linemen. Remember, Thomas was a little banged up. But he's your left guard, and Solomon, another guy. You look at him, and it's hard to imagine he's 6'4" because he's such a wide body. But he's unbelievable. He's just this is a guy you don't want to be in his way. We talked about some of the blocking he did last year, and Trey Hill was impressive with his opportunities last year as a freshman. And he came in that Kentucky game, and you don't want to say Lamont Galliard wasn't missed, but he wasn't missed. Right guard, Big Ben Cleveland, probably the best run blocker on the team through those first 3 games of the year. And now he's back from that broken leg. And then at right tackle, another giant in Isaiah, who's a freshman All-American.
Yeah.
And to your point, and then Cade, maybe the nastiest, meanest, and most versatile guy on the line, Cade Mays. And now we're talking about Jamari Salyer, the number 1 rated guard in the 2018 class. So to your point, it's an absolute dream team that Sam Pittman has not only put together but developed. And if there's a coach in the country, and hey, I don't know why Sam Pittman's not making more than $1 million, and nobody asked me that opinion, but this seems to be the most invaluable assistant coach on Kirby Smart's staff to me.
I'm keeping you long, and I apologize, but I do want to squeeze in something else that Kirby Smart spent a good bit of time talking about yesterday. That's the recent arrest, focusing mostly on Tyreek Stevenson and Tyler Simmons, what happened to them in the bar, the chaotic scene, I believe it's been called, from this past weekend. Mike, does what Smart said yesterday end all of this?
I was really impressed and pleased with Kirby's transparency. Sometimes coaches will make a statement, and then when you go to ask a follow-up, they'll say they've already talked. But Kirby answered questions. It wasn't like Kirby never put the brakes on the conversation. As long as the media wanted to ask about it, he was going to talk about it. That tells me that Kirby Smart is comfortable with the way this has been handled. Now, I imagine his tone with the football team was probably a little different behind closed doors than it was with us. But there's no overreaction. There's no our guys aren't going downtown anymore. There's no, boy, we got some guys that we're going to run till they puke. There was none of that. It was a very mature, almost parental approach that these guys have got to behave, right? Now, I don't think Kirby made light of it, but I don't think he overplayed it either. I got the feeling, though, that with the conversation that Kirby Smart had yesterday, the way he handled that conversation led me to believe that he's very comfortable that there won't be any more that comes out of this. He was comfortable that he didn't think there were any other players that were going to be involved. We know there's an ongoing investigation. He feels like it's just going to be those two guys from what he's gathered from the police. It's my understanding that Kirby has a good working relationship with the local police, be it UGA or Athens-Clarke County. So people need to just stop this police blaming. It's wrong. Stop doing that. These are people that are paid and risk their lives every day to protect you. Stop being stupid. Nobody's out after any athlete, okay? Some guys got out of hand. Kirby Smart has taken accountability for that. He made it clear that, he's putting the responsibility on these guys behaving and say, well, let's just see what the... No. He said these two guys were involved and they're going to be punished. It's to me, it's an encapsulated incident. I don't think we're going to hear any more. I do think the damage is done. I do think that other fans are going to continue to give Georgia trouble about 4 guys arrested in 1 month in the off season. It's an unfortunate stereotype because I don't think this team is built that way. But I think over the course of the rest of the off season and through this season, I think the Georgia players will represent themselves in a way that the fans will feel good about. That's the vibe that I got from Kirby Smart. That's what I think he believes, and he has better insight to this than any of us.
Mike, it is great to have you in the program. We appreciate your coverage from Athens yesterday. It was fun being there with you yesterday there as well, being a part of that. We'll look forward to reading a bunch more from you in the days ahead at DawgNation.com, and it'll be my pleasure to welcome you back to DawgNation Daily again very soon also.
Great work from you and Connor as well, along with Chip Towers, BA. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I'm going to let you hear in a moment some of what Kirby Smart did say yesterday about the whole thing and downtown Athens and everything else. And as I said before, I'm just not that scandalized by really any of this. And listen, if I thought something really serious had ever happened, I'll be the first to tell you, then you've got to get involved and you got to come down hard on something like that. But I'm more mean from the standpoint of law enforcement. I think it's law enforcement's job to come down hard when laws have been broken. I don't really know why we turn football coaches into judges and juries and punishers on this kind of stuff the way that we have. But this kind of thing, I'm just not that scandalized by. Now, Mike brings up a really good point, and I actually addressed this when I was on the radio this morning on 960 The Ref. Obviously, if you go to like a Florida message board or Tennessee message board, a handful of Georgia players being arrested in like 1 month is fodder for them to make fun. And I'll be the first to tell you, if 4 Florida players got arrested in 1 month here on DawgNation Daily, we'd be having a great time with that. But just because the inverse is happening now doesn't mean that any of us have to care. In other words, Twitter is not real life. What people are saying on Twitter is, for the most part, just contained to social media. And, unless you happen to work with some of these, ne'er-do-well rival fans, you're only hearing this kind of stuff on message boards and social media and things like that. And there are 1,000 examples of how what goes on in, like, the social media realm is just not real life. So if you're Kirby Smart, the last thing I would hope he would do is run his program on the basis of, oh, gosh, what are the critics going to say if I don't do this or don't do that? That's just not how I want to see a Georgia program run. So, yes, are we hypocrites? 1,000,000%. We'd be having a great time with rival teams that they have a bunch of guys arrested. Do I think it's a big deal that this happened to Georgia? I honestly do not. And I think that pretending oftentimes is a part of polite society. You have to pretend to be mad. Media's going to pretend to be outraged. Players have to pretend to be sorry. And you just sort of move on from this after that. And for me, that's kind of what this is. But nonetheless, different people have different opinions, and you are free to weigh in on yours. Let me also mention some great savings going on right now at Kroger. Starting tomorrow, you can download a coupon at Kroger.com or on the Kroger app. And then through Saturday, March 30th, you can actually the coupon is up for you to redeem starting tomorrow through Saturday. But in the stores, you can redeem this Friday and Saturday and save on great products like Minute Maid orange juice and bacon. Listen, for those of you that like to cook those breakfasts as a family together as on the weekend, it's a pretty good thing to do. Download the coupon starting tomorrow. Coupon available through Saturday. Redeem it in stores Friday and Saturday at your local Kroger. Go to Kroger.com or the Kroger app to get that coupon. Really good stuff. All right, SEC through time. Let us talk about some of the stories around the SEC. And I told you all this before. Ed Orgeron is out there every single day talking. I mean, I shouldn't say every single day, every single year. It's this constant refrain of this year the offense is going to be different. The first year was LSU is because of Matt Canada. When he found out he hated Matt Canada and he ran him out of town, Canada didn't get along with anybody, and now it's Steve Ensminger, one-time Georgia offensive coordinator going back like the early 90s, believe it or not. He was the offensive coordinator last year, and the offense is going to be way different this year. And I guess for the most part last year it was kind of better. Joe Burrow, a better quarterback than LSU's probably used to having. That was part of that. He was also quoted this week as saying, this is the offense, and I'm paraphrasing. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but this is the offense I've been waiting to coach at LSU. And I guess part of this is because there's a guy named Joe Brady who worked with the Saints, and now he's on the LSU staff now, and they feel good about having the returning quarterback Joe Burrow. I mean, the truth is, I think LSU probably will be better on offense, certainly than they were a year ago, and probably better than they've been in a long time. I just think it's funny that Orgeron says this kind of stuff every single year. I mean, these quotes are almost identical to the stuff he's been saying over the last 3 years, but maybe it's true this time. By the way, speaking of players getting in trouble, Tennessee defensive back Kenneth George Jr. has been suspended indefinitely. He got into what looks to be a pretty serious scuffle in Miami, and I don't know the details of this, but the way it's been described, it comes across as really serious. So he's suspended indefinitely. But here's one thing I'll say about this. Now, I don't know what happened with him when he was down there in Miami. There's allegations of getting in a fight with a police officer or something along those lines. I really don't know what's going to end up being true on this or not. But for the most part, not only lenient with Georgia players but stuff like this, I'm kind of lenient with some of the other teams here as well. Unless he committed a crime, and it's proven that he did, I don't need to see a bunch of guys kicked off college football teams just to make me feel better about, whatever, really anything. I mean, I think for the most part, young men are better with football in their lives as opposed to outside their lives. So I'm not really looking to kick a bunch of people off football teams, be they Georgia players or anybody else. But obviously, this legal process is going to play out. We may find out that the Tennessee defensive back has indeed done something kind of serious here. Antonius Clayton, one of the former, very, very few former five-star signees at Florida, a pass rusher type, is announced on Twitter that he is leaving the Gators program. The truth is he was having a hard time finding a home there. Sometimes the five-star guys just don't really work out, or sometimes they don't have a good fit with the program they're on. That's one of the reasons that, for the most part, I favor liberal transfer rules, although maybe not quite as liberal as they exist in the current landscape of college football. But this is still an issue for Florida, because when you only have a small number of elite recruits, getting something out of the ones you do have becomes really crucial. Now, to Florida's credit, they have found a way to take the occasional three-star guy and turn him into something. In some respects, in recent years, they've been forced to because of just how little elite talent they have had. But here's an example of one that kind of got away. A guy in Clayton that came into the program with a lot of hype and a lot of accolades, and it just is not going to work out. Looks like he is, according to his own social media accounts, looks like he is going to transfer. Let me also mention one more thing as part of our SEC 3 before we move on. We talked yesterday briefly about, I love when ESPN.com takes its way too early top 25, and they publish these little series of articles over the course of the year where they look at issues facing each of these teams. And one of the pieces that's up at ESPN.com right now are I forget the phrasing, but it's something along the lines of the pivotal game, the key game, or whatever, game to circle for each of the way too early top 25 teams. And we talked yesterday about how frequently Texas A&M shows up on this list. Texas A&M plays a very interesting schedule, if not a very tough schedule in 2019. The other thing that I noticed on here, though, is for Auburn, who is in ESPN's way too early top 25 team, way too early top 25, they have the Tigers game early in the season against Oregon as the game to circle here. And I guess the one thing to caution on this, to this point, I have no idea how good Auburn's going to be. Most of this is based on how well the quarterback play turns out. Isn't it probably fair to say, though, that a later season game for Auburn's a lot more interesting? Because we saw Auburn beat Washington a year ago and they not really look like a team capable of winning a big-time non-conference game really for most of the rest of the season. So if any team has been guilty of and capable of producing the false positive early on in the year, maybe it's Auburn. So do with what you will when it comes to the Auburn-Oregon game to start the year. But it is nice to see the hype starting to build for some of these early season SEC games, Georgia included, which takes on Notre Dame in Week 4. Will make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation, Bailey, since we've talked about this, heard Mike Griffith's thoughts on that. It seems like he was pretty satisfied with what he heard from Kirby Smart yesterday. I thought I'd give you a chance to hear that as well. I like this audio from Kirby because he acknowledges what the reality of any situation is. Things are going to happen in life, but it's how you manage yourself in those difficult situations that really matter. Here is Kirby being pretty matter-of-fact when it comes to what happened to Stevenson, what happened to Simmons, and how he wants to see his Georgia players conduct themselves going forward. Here's Kirby from yesterday.
Our kids go downtown. We know our kids go downtown. When you go downtown, you got to behave. You got to act the right way. You got to follow and be law-abiding citizens. And that's the expectation we've got for our players. And to be honest with you, for the most part, our guys do that. But when they don't, they're going to be punished, and we're going to try to correct it, and we're going to do it through educational ways. And certainly going to do that with both Tyreek and Tyler.
I like the phrase educational ways. I can only imagine the educational ways Tyreek and Tyler will be going through as they kind of grow up and learn from this. And, you know, I think if you look at the comment section at DawgNation.com about stuff like this, when these kind of articles have popped up, there is a pocket of Georgia fans who's legitimately worried about this kind of stuff, that somehow when Stevenson and Simmons run afoul of the law on this, or you know, whatever happened with Latavius Brini, and, you know, you connect that to Jaden Hunter's traffic infraction. When you add all this together, it's 4, you know, arrests, if you want to call them that, over the course of 1 month. I think a lot of fans worry, does this signify a lack of distraction, a lack of focus going into the 2019 season where expectations are justifiably high for UG? And I get all of that. And as I said before, I'd be the first to be alarmed if allegations against players ever got to be more serious. We found out something really bad was going on, I'd be the first to be, alarmed by all of that. But as far as where this is now, I don't think there's any evidence to suggest one way or another this has gotten Georgia as a team or a program off course. In the brief window of practice that I got to watch yesterday, who was out there leading the drills with wide receivers, first in the pack, was Tyler Simmons, and the best I could tell, he looked pretty good doing what he was doing, at least when I got to see it. Kirby Smart also had some praise for him as well when he, as a player anyway, when he spoke to reporters yesterday. So I think hopefully with Smart saying what he said yesterday, this sad, brief chapter will now be closed, and Georgia can get back to the business of concentrating on what's going to happen on the field, which for fans is always a lot more fun. All right, speaking of sad chapters closing, let me get to this in just a moment. First, around here, we love being Gator haters, and we love the reminder that it's now been 879 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten Georgia. That is good news. It's our Gator Hater Updater right here on DawgNation Daily. And speaking of the Georgia-Florida rivalry, you may have seen the piece at DawgNation.com from our own Michael Carvel that the Jacksonville Landing is set to be demolished. Now, the best I can tell from following this in the local news there is that it was privately owned. The city has bought it back. They're going to tear it down and rebuild it as something better, which almost anything that you did build would be better. However, I am not here to throw dirt on the Jacksonville Landing. The truth is, had some pretty good memories there over the years. They weren't all good, but some of them pretty fun. So R.I.P. to the Landing, and we'll look forward to seeing what's next in that city if it continues to host a cocktail party. We'll also see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily. And on video. Yeah, I was in Athens, had finished up the Kirby Smart stuff. On my way home, stopped to get a quick bite of dinner, kind of scrolling through, and I saw that about the Landing closing up or torn down, whatever you want to say. And I have to say, there was a little tinge of sadness for me there because There was a time in my life back before I knew what a good spot was that the Jacksonville Landing was about the closest I could come to being at a good, fun spot. And listen, when I was very, very young, very little money, just lucky to be in Jacksonville before Georgia-Florida game, the Jacksonville Landing seemed like the center of the universe at the time. So I have had some moments there for sure, and a lot of regrettable moments too, which many of you can probably speak to as well. So we'll look forward to seeing what's next there. It's a beautiful waterfront area, right? So you got a lot of boats that come in as it is. So if you redesign that and found a way to do kind of like what, like say, a lot of these like live, work, play things that exist around Atlanta now, Avalon near where I live, some of the stuff, more in town as well. If you could find a way to do something like that around Jacksonville, that would really change the landscape of that. I think one of the reasons why some Georgia fans have soured on Georgia, Florida in Jacksonville is because of Jacksonville. I mean, let's face it, the action is always going to be kind of around the First Coast more so than right there in Jacksonville proper. So we'll see where all this is heading. By the way, it's our R.S. Andrews cool down. Heating, air, plumbing, electrical. R.S. Andrews around here, DawgNation, the one we trust to play all the positions. It is our true utility player. You will like them as well. So please make sure you check them out online at rsandrews.com. Let Dari and his staff go to work for you, and they will take good care of you. You will be satisfied with the work. They deliver smiles around there, and there's no question about that whatsoever. All right, let me get some comments here, really on anything you want to talk about. Anything you want to talk about. Brian Kephart on the subject of Auburn, who we mentioned a moment ago, says the real question for Auburn is who's going to throw the rock around next year. I think that is a very good question. And the thing that I've been a believer on is that we may see a different quarterback near the beginning of the season from what we see, at the end of the season. By the end of the year, it may be Bo Nix's job. He may be the guy that has that. But at the beginning of the year, you may be talking more about a Malik Willis or something like that. One of the guys that's been there, kind of passing that baton a bit in terms of, and we'll get my face back here on the screen again because I know that's what you pay to see. But I could see Willis being that guy at the beginning of the year, or maybe it is a short-term thing with a guy like Joey Gatewood, which Malzahn praised. But if Auburn's going to finish the year in the top 25, I think they're eventually going to have to give way to Bo Nix. I just think that if Nix is not a freshman quarterback capable of starting, then Auburn's probably not a top 25 team. Ultimately, I think both those things may end up doing. Eric M. Rio says, BA, what's DawgNation Daily going to be doing for G-Day? Any get-togethers, tailgating? I think that's a great question. We're definitely going to be out and about doing a bunch of video that day. As far as other stuff to add into that mix, I think that's a really good thing to think about. Crow King 123 says, BA, if all things remain equal between Mathis, Stevenson, and Beck, who wins the quarterback job next year? So we assume that Fromm is gone. If we're doing the Stetson Bennett, Dwan Mathis, Carson Beck conversation, I'd have to make Beck the favorite there. That's what I think he'd be a pretty clear favorite right now over Mathis and Bennett. But I've been wrong before. But I would have to make Beck the favorite. And Crow King says, of course, assuming that Fromm is gone. And I certainly understand where you're coming from. Janet Walker says, BA, you're wearing my favorite quarter zip shirt today. Looking good. Thanks so much for this. So, Janet, I really appreciate you saying this. So this is also my favorite as well. This is from the UGA bookstore. And this is the kind of thing, and this is not a commercial, but this is like the UGA 10 thing. So if you look below the picture here, it says UGA 10. So this is like kind of a special type of thing. I think the bookstore is the only ones who sell this. So, I got this from the UGA bookstore. Some of the gals who work here at DawgNation World Headquarters got this for me for Christmas a couple of years ago. So I wear this with pride every single time. So thanks so much for saying that, Janet. I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. Chevron Hannah says, do we have a 5-star quarterback coming in 2020? Right now, Carson Beck is only a 4-star quarterback, but I mean, I think a lot of smart recruiting analysts would probably say that Beck has a decent shot of maybe being like the number 2 pro-style quarterback in the entire country, maybe the number 2 overall quarterback in the entire country. So I think there is a conventional wisdom out there that Beck may work his way into 5-star status by the time the 2020 cycle comes to an end because of just kind of where he compares to other quarterbacks, given the importance of the position, that he may rise up the ranks and actually be a 5-star before it's all said and done. Let me go over here to our Facebook friends here for a moment as well. Catch up with them here as a part of our program here today. Somebody in our comment section, I think it said that when it comes to Stevenson and Simmons, that running the Sanford Stadium steps will get their attention. Yeah, I no doubt bet it probably will. Ricky Jett also agrees that Carson Beck could become a 5-star, and that's probably true. Ro Hawkins says most college magazines are picking the Gators to win the East this year. Let me see a college magazine do that. Ro, I will laugh in the face of said publication if they indeed do that, because it's that's just not ready to happen yet. I think that Florida's still a long way away from being competitive with Georgia. Now, you'll say, well, BA, you're biased on this, and that's fine. You can take that with a grain of salt if you want. I will admit, I was a bit surprised when Bet Online, one of these online gambling houses, sports books, when they released some of their early look-aheads to their so-called games of the year a few days ago. I was a little bit surprised that Georgia was only a 4-point favorite in that game. My assumption is when the actual real line comes out the week of the game, Georgia will be a much higher point spread than that. I think that Georgia's got some legitimate issues it's facing within its own roster, and toppling Alabama or Clemson will be a very difficult challenge for UGA. I'm not going to sit here and tell you everything is sunshine and roses. Georgia got some significant challenges. Those challenges, I believe, do not currently include anyone in the SEC East, and that's just as matter of factly as I can say that. Let me, Christopher James says, say it, BA, Florida winning isn't realistic. It's not right now. Now, maybe by 2020, some of that's changed a bit. Maybe Georgia's suffered some attrition that it hasn't been able to replace. Maybe Florida's added a bunch. As of right now, that's not where this thing is going. Santiago D. Arn, huge thanks for those kind words, Santiago. That's very nice of you. Thank you so much. Ricky Jett says, no, it's not any bias from me. He means the Lizards will not win the East. Yeah, not right now. I just don't see that. I don't. I mean, I think that Florida can be dangerous on an individual game basis. Maybe not quite so much dangerous for Georgia, because Georgia probably has that game circled. But I don't see that threat coming from the East right now. I don't. I mean, honestly, my tune over this is over the course of time has changed a little bit. It used to be that when we started the Gator Hater Countdown, which would have been after the loss to Florida in 2016, that's when we started the Gator Hater Countdown. Part of the reason I started that then was my belief that over the course of decades, Florida was going to be Georgia's most significant SEC East challenge. In addition to the fact that it's a traditional rivalry and one that Georgia needed to win, Florida also had this stature as a really important obstacle to overcome because of just how historically good it had been. And I would always say this, for me, is true in a way it's not true for Tennessee, because General Neyland's not walking through that door. That in the current modern age of college football, access to players really matters. And Tennessee geographically doesn't have the kind of access to players that Florida has. What I didn't know then that has come to be true now is that Jeremy Pruitt has come to Tennessee, and he has kind of negated the geographic issues that Tennessee faces. Now, first of all, Tennessee as a state has probably produced a few more 4-star recruits over the last couple of years than we're used to seeing it produce. Tennessee hasn't signed any of them, but the state is producing a little more talent than it once did. Nashville as a town is just growing. When your population grows, all populations within that city kind of grow, including the population of college football prospects. So Nashville's kind of seeing some of that going on right now, but Pruitt's also been really good at coming into the Atlanta area, coming into just Georgia in particular. He's going to go into Florida. He's combating the geographic issues by extending the borders of where Tennessee recruits. So therefore, I will say this, and some of y'all don't like it, any kind of like negative tinge at all, but I will say this nonetheless. If you look across the next 8 or 9 years, I think the next non-UGA team to win the SEC East, as it stands right now, is most likely Tennessee. I don't think it's 2 years from now. I don't think it's 3 years from now. But if you had to say, BA, one of these years, Georgia's not going to win the East. Who's most likely to do it? I believe it's Tennessee. And that's a change from where I was a year ago. If you'd asked me this question a year ago, I would have told you Will Muschamp at South Carolina. I'm not quite sure where Muschamp is in all of this now, because I believe that Pruitt is just seemingly a younger, more energetic version of the same thing that Muschamp's trying to sell. Muschamp's trying to do the whole, hey, I used to work for Nick Saban thing. I'm a little bit like Kirby Smart. Well, Jeremy Pruitt can say, I'm that same thing too, a little bit like Kirby Smart. I used to work for Nick Saban, and I'm a little bit younger, and I don't have the baggage of having failed as a head coach at Florida. So in this case, I actually think Pruitt's inexperience works for him, because sometimes what you don't know, actually makes you feel a little bit more fondly about something. So in this case, Pruitt's lack of track record in comparison to Will Muschamp probably helps him with the recruits, because not all of Muschamp's track record is very good. So if you give me the next 8 years in the future, the SEC East team that would be most likely to win the division in a year in which Georgia doesn't, I'll take Tennessee right now over South Carolina and over Florida.
Can I get way off the board here?
Please.
So how many games did Tennessee win last year?
5, is that right?
That's correct. They were very non-competitive at the end of the season as well.
That's true.
They did beat Kentucky at home. I'll give them credit for that. They responded to beating Kentucky by getting waxed by Vanderbilt and by the team I think has maybe the best shot at one day eventually taking an SEC East championship away from Georgia, and that is the Missouri Tigers.
Okay, so we've seen Missouri win the East a couple times. Mm-hmm. What I'm going to, I guess, somewhat bicker about is I don't know that any of these East teams are capable of taking one away from Georgia, but if Georgia gives one away,
right,
either through injuries or through who even knows. I mean, 8 years in the future, y'all, is a really long time. I mean, heaven only knows where any of us are 8 years from now. Barry Odom seems like a more solid SEC coach now than I thought he was a year ago. And I got to tell you, I mean, I hope that I'm good at keeping track of the things I am both right and wrong about. I love arguing for a living. I like arguing with you. I like arguing with Connor. I love the argument of sports fans. I'm wrong about plenty. One of the things I've turned out, I believe, to be pretty wrong about is that Derek Dooley's a better offensive coordinator than I thought he was. My point last year was anybody who was capable of calling plays was already calling plays because it's such a scarce position as it was.
It should be easy to identify.
He was only a wide receivers coach with the Cowboys. That to me was not a great sign. They ran the ball better. I think that Drew Lock was comfortable. Now the play call at the end of Lock's career where they did the option read thing with him on the outside was a disaster, but we all know individual play calls aren't proof of anything. Mm-hmm. So as long as he stays there as OC, I think they are certainly a threat to be a top 25 team. But listen, they had fewer than 25,000 fans per game last year. I don't know how you get any recruits to Missouri. So long term, I'm always going to be nervous about that.
So I understand that. However, that was a Missouri team. They went into Gainesville last year, and they beat Florida by 3 touchdowns. That was a team, if the ball bounces a little differently, they absolutely should have beaten Kentucky and got hosed on a fraudulent pass interference call that apparently now in the NFL will be reviewable. The South Carolina game, another game they should have won. They're a few bounces away from being a 10-2 regular season team, with the only 2 losses being to Georgia and Alabama. Now, obviously, they have to replace Drew Lock this year, and I do understand the recruiting thing. St. Louis produces some blue chip guys every year, but certainly not enough, and Missouri isn't really even owning that. Yeah. But, the big tight end, Albert, and I can't pronounce his last name.
I'll give it a shot. Is it – actually, I'm going to – the closest I'd come to saying Welcome.
Alberto.
Right. Even like the Missouri SID say you should just call him Alberto.
Yeah. Missouri, this goes back to the Gary Pinkel days. They found and developed guys who weren't superstar recruits. Yeah. They ended up being high NFL draft picks.
Right.
Alden Smith, Coney Ely, Shane Ray, the number wide receivers, offensive lineman Mitch Morse. So, they've done a very good job of developing talent and identifying guys, and Odom is a clear descendant of that Pinkel tree.
Yeah.
Now, I will be very interested to see how they do this year with Kelly Bryant running the helm as opposed to Drew Lock, who's going to be a first-round pick in next month's NFL draft. But, if that Missouri team, wins 8 competitive in 9 games this year, I think that's going to bode very well for the future of that program.
Let me get Dapper Dan here, who says the problem with these other SEC East teams ever winning the division is going to be they will need to drastically improve their offense if they want to stand a chance against our defense going forward. I think that's true, and I think that Dan also kind of touches on another point too, that the one thing that could potentially change all of this is if a program like Florida really finds a quarterback, because much the same way I've called Roquan kind of the eraser for Georgia's 2017 defense, a really good quarterback can be an eraser for a team's offense as well. Now, Missouri had one, and it didn't make much of a difference against a team like Georgia, but you kind of get my point here. If a more talented composite roster gets a really good quarterback, then all of a sudden Georgia will be threatened much more than they are right now. I don't believe Felipe Franks is that guy, nor do I believe anybody else in the Florida roster is that guy. I don't really think anybody on the Tennessee roster is currently that guy either. The one thing that I have said, I think the most interesting from a Georgia perspective, non-UGA assistant coach in the SEC right now may be T. Martin, the wide receivers coach for the Vols, and I'll tell you why. We know, as long as this current staff that the Tennessee's put together, we know they're going to recruit pretty well on defense. They have a very good defensive recruiting staff. Derek Ansley, I believe, is a terrific defensive coordinator for that. I think Scherer can hold his own. Anybody else you want to mention? That's a pretty good defensive recruiting staff. Offensively, though, we know Jim Chaney's not a recruiter going back to his time at Georgia. Chris Winkie may turn out to be a really good recruiter, but, other than his ties to IMG, I don't know that he's got that reputation yet. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. I think you don't know. T. Martin, though, is one of these guys that go either way. If you look at his 24/7 profile, he signed a lot of he's been responsible for a lot of 5-star signees over the course of his career. He also seemed to wear out his welcome most recently at USC. Is this guy a top-flight assistant or not? Is he a magnet for 5-star talent or not? Wide receiver position, other positions too. If he turns out to be that way, then Tennessee is formidable in a way that Florida isn't, because I think all of a sudden you start looking at some, alpha recruiters on that Tennessee staff in a way that Florida can't really match, and in a way that could potentially become a little bit of a problem for UGA.
I disagree with you on the whole T. Martin thing. I think if he was who you think he is in terms of a recruiter and getting talent and, and being a difference maker as an assistant coach, USC wouldn't have fired him.
Okay, so let me counter back on that, because that's not necessarily an incorrect statement. What if Mike Bobo were the Troy coach instead of the Colorado State coach? Wouldn't we assume that Bobo would have an even more talented roster coaching in the South than he would in Colorado, just because of you're just 2,000 miles away from the area in which you know best. So you may be right, and
I'll let you finish.
You may be right that the USC time for Martin just kind of proves that hey, he's not going to be the next great thing when it comes to offensive assistance. Or being back closer to home, working with his alma mater, working with a head coach that certainly is a go-getter when it comes to recruiting, that it just may be a more comfortable fit. So I'm not ready to close the door that Martin's not a legitimate, I don't want to say force, that's overpraising, but a potential nemesis. And if Tennessee signs Raheem Jarrett, which a lot of people think they're going to, or at least get a commitment from Raheem Jarrett, which a lot of people think they're going to, you got to at least give him credit for that.
Sure, but, USC can recruit any kid in the state. They get all of the top California kids. They've always gotten the top California kids. So, he's also a wide receivers coach. So, show me the wide receivers coach that has a profound impact from an offensive standpoint. I don't think...
Dale McGee recruited Justin Fields, though, or at least very instrumental in Justin Fields.
I said wide receivers coach, first of all. And, to that point, Justin Fields didn't have a tremendous impact on Georgia's offense.
Hartley was instrumental on Carson Beck, and I'm assuming other programs kind of work the same way, whereas like Martin may be wide receivers coach.
I think you're skewing my point here in that, Tennessee has a lot of Tennessee wasn't a very good offensive team last year. Jeremy Pruitt doesn't strike us, given his defensive background, as a guy who's capable of turning around an offense. I don't think T. Martin is going to be that guy either. So that's putting a lot on Jim Chaney's plate, who, it's fair to question Jim Chaney.
Let me, I don't disagree with that. Let me do a few more comments here as well, including I want to get CJ Oran's comment as well, because he has a great point that kind of changes the topic. So let me do a couple things on this. Matt Rukavina says it's already done for Tennessee, and while I don't necessarily believe, he says basically it's going to be Kentucky 2.0. While I don't necessarily agree with that, we are in kind of an age now where, and I've said this relatively recently, if you look around the SEC, there's virtually no fan base who's unhappy. Or there are very few fan bases who are unhappy with their coach. You could probably say Auburn fans are very, very skeptical of Gus Malzahn, but for the most part, SEC fans are still buying into their guy. I feel like we are, I think we have, 5 openings in basketball right now, 4 or 5 openings in basketball. This is going to be a tricky year for some of these SEC football coaches. Chad Thomas Black mentioned Will Muschamp a moment ago. I mean, South Carolina, what if the offense doesn't get better this year? What if Bentley's not the answer at quarterback, but Daquan Joyner's not the answer either? I don't think you fire Muschamp because who are you going to hire? But South Carolina's facing a tough choice on some of this kind of stuff. What if all the talent that Kentucky's lost, what if Kentucky goes back to being Kentucky? How do Wildcats fans that weren't, I think, wild about some of the decisions that were made a year ago, what do they do with Mark Stoops then? This is going to be a difficult year in 2019 for a lot of these SEC coaches who are currently enjoying favorable status with their fan bases. They won't all stay that way by the end of this year. We're due for an uprising.
I will say, I mean, the long winter could come, and Eddie Grant's still going to be at Kentucky.
That's exactly right. So Wildcats fans, you've always got that going for you. Let me get CJ Oran for a minute, who mentioned the subject that was a part of our DN90 from last night and this morning involving Jamari Salyer and the words of praise that Smart threw his way. And CJ says that it's still going to be hard for Salyer to unseat a guy like Ben Cleveland as a starting right guard. And I do believe that's true. Hearing Smart say what he said yesterday, though, was enough for me. It's almost like I'm taking roll. The reason why I asked Smart about Salyer yesterday is because I feel like we haven't heard a lot from Smart on Salyer. And when a guy's playing some, but maybe not quite as much as Trey Hill and Cade Mays, it's kind of hard to know how he fits into all of that. So I just wanted to hear, hey, update on this because we haven't heard about this in a while. And then you find out that Smart was very pleased, apparently, with Jamari Salyer. That, for me, was what all that was about. So even if Salyer right now is not ready to break through and earn that starting job, kind of like Cade Mays on the left side, which I talked to Mike Griffith about a couple of minutes ago, even if they're not ready to break out and be better than the top 5 offensive linemen for Georgia, the fact that they are capable of doing that is, for me, just enough, and hopefully for Salyer, just enough too, because as an offensive lineman, you don't have to play all 4 years to go make a lot of money in the NFL. You just have to be good enough to play when your career is done, and it seems like Salyer, even if we haven't seen him on the field a lot, is well on his way to earning that status.
I mean, it's the luxury of all. It's the height of luxury. It's, ordering a pizza and a limousine on Fifth Avenue. Just having so much offensive linemen that a truly, once-in-a-generation offensive line recruit is living up to the hype, at least in Kirby Smart's eyes, and it's also very plausible he doesn't get on the field this coming season just because Georgia has such a stacked and dominant offensive line from left tackle to right tackle.
I also think that that other thing, the fact that Salyer, according to Smart's getting used some at tackle, that's not really what I thought that he would be doing. I thought he came to Georgia to exclusively be an interior offensive lineman. That's what I thought his profile at Georgia was going to be. The fact that he is getting some work at tackle and apparently legitimately performing there at practice, if we take Smart at his word, that to me is also very interesting too, because Kirby likes these jack-of-all-trades backups. He likes Dyshawn Sims is one of those guys, and Salyer is probably a more talented version of that. These guys that can play multiple positions because, let's face it, Georgia's going to have an offensive line injury at some point in time in 2019. You can't go through a season without it. But if you're talking about the Mazes and the Salyers, key backups at least 2 positions, in Salyer's case, maybe as many as 4 positions, if that's what he is capable of doing for you, that is something that most teams can't match. And I'm not going to tell you that good backup offensive lineman is the key to winning a national championship, but it is most definitely the key to keep from losing one.
Right. A very good example here. So in 2016, the Atlanta Falcons, when a top 10 all-time offense, Matt Ryan won MVP. Their starting 5 offensive linemen did not miss a single snap during the regular season.
Yeah.
Then in the playoffs, Alex Mack breaks his leg and continues to play on it, but he was clearly not the same player. And then the right tackle, whose name is escaping me at the moment, leaves in that Super Bowl.
Is it Schrader? Am I making
Ryan
that up?
Schrader,
Yeah.
I believe. And you could tell in the second half of that game, when the Atlanta offensive line wasn't what it was over the course of the season, it really affected how that offense can function, and it's part of the reason they ended up losing that Super Bowl. Whereas if they have a fully healthy offensive line as they did all season, they probably win that game. So all that being said, it is an incredible luxury, and I think also an incredible necessity that Georgia has guys who can come in and do an adequate job filling in. We even saw in the national title game against Alabama, Jonah Williams, who's going to be a first-round pick next month, he leaves in the first quarter of that game. Alex Leatherwood steps right in, and there isn't, a noticeable drop-off at all at that left tackle position.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And other commenters kind of saying the same thing. Scott Harris saying that Salyer's mega intelligent, too. We need him on the field. I think that's certainly true. Steve Banks says this time last season we didn't see how important Cade Mays would be, but he stepped up when Cleveland was hurt. He also stepped up at the beginning of the year when Andrew Thomas was hurt, too. So you got a couple of those guys potentially in your discussion right now, which I think is a good thing. On a different subject, Robert Hosea brings up Chris Smith, saying that he's not getting the attention that he deserves in that defensive back competition right now. And I think part of the problem with that, though, Robert, is the fact that defensive back competition is really deep right now. There are a lot of names to be considered, but I think you're right to mention Smith as one of those. And one of the things that's always impressed me the most about Smith is going back to before he enrolled at Georgia in 2018, the fact that he had already started working on putting on some weight himself. This is a guy that's a little undersized compared to what, so sometimes you look for from top-flight defensive backs. He's a little smaller than that. But of his own devices, doing his own work, he already started adding some of that weight himself and putting himself in good physical condition even before he arrived at Georgia. There's no doubt he's improved his body even more since being there because of the nutrition and the Scott Sinclair weight program that you get to be a part of. But one of the things that I liked about Smith is he took a lot of this on his own. Smith is just a good dude. I've interviewed him a few times, and he comes across as just a really good dude. It's hard not to root for him. And I do believe that sometimes those intangible qualities that he seems to have, I do think they can help you on the field. I think that he's battling against some otherworldly athletes, which makes it tough. But I'm kind of like Robert in that I got a little bit of a rooting interest in seeing Smith eventually do well at Georgia, because in the times I've been lucky enough to talk to him in a one-on-one situation, I've been really impressed with what he brings to the table. Over here on YouTube here for a moment, the Dogfather says the offensive line will show up this year more noticeably than ever. I mean, it's certainly one of the ways in which we start veering into the conversation of how good can Jake Fromm be, or who can join DeAndre Swift as a running back, and can Georgia have that, as Terrence Edwards said, number one receiver that potentially one day gets towards that 1,000-yard threshold. I think that the unspoken part of all those discussions is that a really good offensive line makes all of that easier and makes all of that more likely. And I think that is an incredibly important point, that this offensive line is the rising tide that lifts every ship on the Georgia offense potentially. Let me get a few more over here on YouTube. Elite Georgia Boy says by the time these kids get to the NFL, they know the ropes. College gets them ready for that politics in the NFL. And yeah, I mean, I would say that certainly, one of the things that you hear from a lot of guys going back to pro day is, navigating that process can be a little bit difficult, because I think the thing that, and this is not just true of the Georgia players, but I think it's true of every kind of guy like this that goes through this process. They're always a little confused for why the game film just doesn't speak for itself. Like, why are we doing all of this when I just, put my life on the line for the last 4 years? And honestly, I mean, I think even the NFL guys will tell you, the personnel guys, that picking the right players and stocking the roster with the right talent is not an easy thing to do, and who really knows what really is the distinguishing characteristic one over another. But they're all kind of going through that challenge. Jay Parker says, what's David Marshall's status? And Connor, I'll let you weigh in on this. We had a chance to talk to Marshall a bit yesterday, and I didn't get the impression he's all that close to playing football again.
No. I mean, he had a Liz Frank foot injury, and those take time to come back from. So I wouldn't really expect to see a whole lot of David Marshall at the G-Day spring game.
No, I wouldn't either. And beyond that, I think it's still very much in doubt. And, listen, I love Kirby Smart as much as anybody, but this is an example of maybe a little more clarity would have been. I mean, are you really gaining any kind of competitive edge by keeping the nature of Marshall's injury as secret as it was? Never really revealing all that much on a week-to-week basis last year after he got hurt. And even now, kind of leaving Marshall out there to kind of fend for himself to say, no, I'm really not all that close to being able to go out and do some of this kind of stuff and not really sure when that's going to happen. The level of secrecy involving Marshall's Liz Frank situation, I will admit it kind of baffles me a little bit, and I say that as something of a smart apologist.
I will say Smart did bring up, though, I think something that, we haven't really talked about a whole lot, but it is concerning. Georgia, especially on the interior of that defensive line, I mean, we've talked a lot about the outside linebackers, the edge rushers, and just how, talented Georgia is at the position. They're very thin, which is the word Kirby Smart used, at that defensive line, along the defensive line. I mean, other than, Malik Herring, with Rochester out, David Marshall out, other than Malik Herring and Tyler Clark, Jordan Davis, who's, constantly, trying to improve and get in better shape, and that's something that I think is just going to dog him for his entire career. There are a lot of questions about this Georgia defensive line, and questions that I don't think, even bringing in a Trayvon Walker is going to answer all of them.
Yeah, I think that's really true. First of all, I mean, I've said before, you give me a percentage of anybody's earnings in this Georgia roster right now, I may take Walker over anybody, but I don't know that I'm thinking of him as a big factor on the 2019 team just because of the difficulty of playing the defensive line position as a freshman. I think that's a challenge. Walker's not on my list, shortest of short lists anyway, of breakout freshmen for 2019. I wouldn't really have Walker there on that. And I do believe that for Georgia fans who want to cover every base and worry about every possible contingency, if Georgia is less than what we think they can be, the lack of depth along the defensive line, I think, is the number one thing that may eventually trip up this team. I do believe. I was looking at some stats a little earlier, I don't even remember why. Boy, there were a lot of games last year where Georgia was barely even average when it comes to stopping the run. It's easy to forget about that because in total the season seemed way more good than bad. This was not a great run-stopping team a year ago. And you're talking about
it's why they got pretty thoroughly, the final score in the Texas game did not show, I think, what that game really was. They got dominated against LSU and Texas, largely because they just couldn't stop the run.
So you got to do something about that. And, as it stands right now, you're working to build back up just to even be as good as you've been in recent years. I mean, go back and watch the first half of the Rose Bowl against Oklahoma. Everybody gets all the attention to Baker Mayfield. Mayfield's certainly making some big throws, but it was really those dangerous running plays. Rodney Anderson, really good-looking Oklahoma running back. Sermon, the kid from Georgia. It was those dangerous running plays that almost got Georgia in some real trouble in that game. And, if you're talking about Georgia finishing short of championship dreams this year, I think the same thing, might be an issue then. Georgia's got to get better at stopping the run. Jeff Sentell has done a good job of pointing this out. Another example of where Jeff can be matter-of-fact. And Jeff has matter-of-factly said that defensive line's got to improve. I don't think he's wrong about that. My optimistic spin on this, and I don't have to put an optimistic spin, but I do think there is an optimistic spin here. I think that the issues along the defensive line last year were magnified by also issues with your linebacking core. I just really believe that Georgia's linebacking core is going to be a real strength this season, much improved compared to a year ago, and a strength compared to virtually any team in America this year. Therefore, I hope that makes it a little easier on the defensive line. I do. But Georgia's got to find somebody else to do what Jordan Davis does. As of right now, I don't know, other than Davis, how many Georgia defensive linemen I would say that guy's good at stopping the run. I don't know. They're all on a play-to-play, game-to-game basis capable of getting the job done. But Jordan Davis does the job, and I think those are two different things. I don't know who else I would say that about, but it does need to be someone else, at least somebody else.
Right. I think Tyler Clark and Julian Rochester, they're certainly a little bit better against the pass and pass rushing than they are, as run stoppers. And Georgia needs to, find guys. Now, maybe Malik Herring takes another step forward. He's someone who improved over the course of last year. But Georgia also has to replace Jonathan Ledbetter, who was it didn't always show up in the stat sheet, but, watching the game closely, he was a pretty impactful player just in terms of, clogging up blocks and knowing sort of, how to correctly read and diagnose a play from that defensive tackle position.
Will Marlowe and Eric Rio on YouTube are talking about Jordan Davis is healthy. I don't think Jordan Davis is injured anymore. The thing that Smart's talked about a couple times, including again yesterday, is that challenge of keeping his weight down. But what I noticed about Smart yesterday in talking about Davis is he had really softened his language from the first time he mentioned that. Y'all remember Smart goes on the Atlanta radio station. We talked about this when he said it. He goes on the Atlanta radio station. He got one of those questions of, hey, how much do you love having Jordan Davis there in the middle of that defense? One of those things that kind of sets him up for an easy answer, and Smart sidestepped the easy answer. This is like a month or so ago. He sidestepped the easy answer and say, listen, Jordan Davis got to keep his weight down. So that was a pretty forceful challenge. Yesterday, he did mention that again about keeping weight down for Davis, not getting up there too high. But he also turned that into a joke about how if I ran as much as Davis did, my wife would be happy because I'd be in a lot better shape. So he certainly softened his language about, how severe Davis's weight issues might be. So if you're a Georgia fan, you probably take that as pretty good news. But when it comes to a concern about Davis, it's not injury related the way that it was at the end of last year. It's more just physical conditioning related. But for these big clogged middle defensive linemen, they're probably always going to be dealing with that. There are a lot of football players that have a hard time holding on to weight. My experience is your big nose guards aren't always like that.
No.
They usually come by that weight a lot more authentically. And I get the impression that Jordan Davis is probably that way too, which, listen, who among us doesn't know what that kind of feels like? By the way, can I mention a non-Georgia fan's comment? Because I thought this was really interesting. G. Gray says, and G. Gray's a Bama fan, so that gives him a little extra credibility to say this. He says he thinks that when Tua's gone from Alabama, that Bo Nix will be the best quarterback in the SEC. That's how good he thinks Nix is. I think for a Bama fan to say that about an Auburn quarterback, he means it because, let's face it, G. Gray's not looking for, some easy reason to praise Auburn on this. I think that's a really interesting take. Connor, what's your response to that?
I'd like to, see a little bit more out of Bo Nix before crowning him, but to G. Grace's point, so let's say Tua leaves this year. Let's say Jake Fromm goes pro this year. Who's the quarterback in the SEC in 2020 that is scaring you? You'll never admit this on air, but secretly at home you're like, I don't know how Georgia tries to slow this guy down.
If I'm doing a correct landscape of the conference as it looks right now, there is no obvious answer to that question. Because honestly, what I've seen from Paul Tyson and Talia Tagovailoa, I don't know that either one of them become that necessarily. I guess if you're giving me the field versus Nix, I'll take the field, and that's partially due to the fact that experts have told me that the 2019 class for quarterbacks was just a down year comparatively speaking to other years. Therefore, I think quarterbacks in that class all of a sudden look better in comparison to their current competition than they do in comparison to the entire universe of competition. So I assume that Nix right now possibly benefits from that just a little bit, and maybe Ryan Helinski, the incoming freshman quarterback at South Carolina, maybe benefits from that, some of that the same way. But it is fair to say that if next year we're talking about no seniors, no Fromm, no Tua, the top flight crop of SEC quarterbacks is unknown. Now, the other thing to say to this is that may just be the way the college football is now, that you don't know who quarterbacks are, that you find out who they are, but you go into, 2 seasons from now, we don't know who anybody's quarterback is going to be because they're all either coming in from high school or moving around. I get the impression that if the current rules stand, quarterback more so than anything else is going to become a very transient position. And you may not be able to do a whole lot of long-term projecting. And that's why I really believe that, Georgia fans, after the Fromm Fields, I'll call it a debacle because of the way it ended, they want separation between quarterbacks going forward. I don't believe you're going to be able to plan that out anymore. I don't believe you're going to be able to say, okay, it's Carson Beck now, and in 2 years after that, it's going to be blah, blah, blah. And then 2 years after
Stockton.
Yeah. I don't know that it's going to be quite that clean anymore because for Georgia or anybody else, I hope it is. But I just don't know. I think there's a lot about this new world when it comes to quarterbacks that you just got to wait and see on.
names that maybe come to mind, Emory Jones, if he pans out at Florida, who knows if he even gets on the field this year because of Philippe Franks. Kellen Mond at Texas A&M, Jimbo has a good track record with quarterbacks, and you could certainly see him taking a step forward. He's probably the favorite. But if I'm remembering correctly, I believe Kellen Mond can also go pro after this year.
In what sport?
In football. Theoretically, he could go pro.
I'm kidding.
All athletes go pro in something other than sports.
I've seen that commercial a time or two. You are also touching on something that I think is really interesting. And this goes back to G. Grace's point, and some other people are kind of making some similar points in our Facebook and YouTube comment sections. When you talk about, hey, quarterbacks of the future, I don't know that I'm going to bet on an individual player as much as I'm going to bet on a spot. You mentioned starting quarterback for Jimbo Fisher. One of the things that I think makes A&M dangerous in the West is I'm going to assume that Jimbo Fisher is going to have a good quarterback. Look at all the first-round quarterbacks he's coached up in the past. E.J. Manuel, Christian Ponder. Now, these guys didn't do a lot in the NFL.
Literally all of them stink in the NFL.
But listen, that ain't my problem. My football played on Saturdays. That's not my problem. Jamarcus Russell. You can also add him in.
They all stink.
But the point is, the college teams that had them were, for the most part, glad to have them. So my assumption is Jimbo Fisher's going to have a good quarterback at Texas A&M. I'll tell you another name that we don't ever talk about that could also be in this discussion too. Now that he's kind of getting his sea legs under him a little bit, he had a top 25 class. Chad Morris at Arkansas is probably always going to have a good quarterback. Former Clemson offensive coordinator, made a ton of money there, went to SMU. I don't know how he did, but he did well enough to get the Arkansas job. The odds are Chad Morris is going to have a pretty good quarterback at Clemson.
Nick Stark will be that guy in 2020.
I think so. Is Stark not eligible in 2019?
I don't think so. I think he's
How is he the only quarterback that's not eligible this year?
I think he's choosing to sit out the year because they brought in Morse's guy from SMU, Ben Hicks, I believe.
Yeah.
So
that's why James Coley's an important discussion to have. Does Coley fit in, assuming Georgia can keep him around for a while and he doesn't become a head coach or something? Can Coley become that guy of, I don't know who the Georgia quarterback's going to be, but I know this: Coley tutors quarterbacks, he produces quarterbacks. And Georgia's going to be fine at that position. Let's face it, I don't know that Dan Mullen, as much as Florida fans want to believe he is that guy, I don't know that he's necessarily that guy. I mean, you joked about all of Jimbo's quarterbacks failing once they got the NFL. I mean, the reclamation project that was Nick Fitzgerald, the truth is, I'm not so sure that Dan Mullen ultimately did that great of a job with Fitzgerald at Mississippi State, nor do I think he's doing that good of a job with Felipe Franks right now. And Emory Jones maybe returning punts by the time his Florida career ends, but at the rate that he's going right now. So I don't know that Mullen fits into this. And we'll wait and see what happens with Winky and Chaney and whatever that brain trust there is at Tennessee. But going forward, the quarterback thing may be more about the coach that produces them more than who the quarterback indeed is. All right, it's like 2 p.m. We got to get ready to go here. Crow King 123 says, with Mathis and Beck, we have potential. Yeah. I will say this, Crow King. Watching Mathis out there yesterday, first of all, I think that 2 is kind of a cool number for him. If you just walked out to practice and you saw him, he looks really, really good just standing there. Some of the stuff, once he starts playing, you can see that he's obviously still got some things that he's working on. There's something about a tall quarterback. Y'all read the studies about how, like, tall CEOs just make more money. There's something about a tall quarterback that there's a natural gravitas associated with a tall quarterback. A guy that when he gets down in that position, he still has a good bit of stature to him. So I got to tell you, I thought that seeing Mathis in the Georgia helmet yesterday, I thought he looked pretty slick and pretty cool. Nice, impressive, physical presence. Obviously, he runs really well. The throwing stuff, at least the brief stuff that I saw yesterday, there's clearly some stuff that he is in the midst of working on. But you want to talk about just, drawing attention to himself, just standing out there. Big, tall quarterback will do that for you. And Mathis, nice single-digit number. I thought he looked good yesterday.
Remind me a little bit of, like, looking at Jamarcus Russell.
No, I'm not going to. Jamarcus Russell was fat. DeJuan Mathis is not fat.
He was fat after college. But, to your point, yeah, DeJuan Mathis looks like a quarterback, but he's still got to put a lot of things together in terms of, playing like
Elite Georgia boy says, "Dang, BA, that got weird."
It did get weird.
Sorry.
It did get weird.
But y'all know what I'm talking about. You see a guy that looks good in his uniform. I thought he looked good in his uniform. I guess that's not making it be less weird, but y'all know what I'm saying. Miriam Martin Corbin also casting her vote for Mathis, saying Mathis is going to be something. Yeah, look, I mean, if you ask me who's the better prospect right now, Mathis currently on the roster, Carson Beck, who's not. I guess I'd lean in the direction of Carson Beck, but that's no disrespect to Mathis. But this whole thing's going to be really interesting to see how it all unfolds. I've said before that if Mathis is capable of beating out Bennett, then my thought is you don't worry about redshirt whatsoever. You let him be a backup quarterback and play in as many games as you can and really kind of find out what he brings to the table. I think that would be a good thing, a really good thing. All right, let us get ready to go. We've got a very fun special edition of Before the Hedges this afternoon presented by Kroger. We're going to hear from a lot of big-time names, including Miles Murphy, and we'll try to parse words and really, really overanalyze everything that Murphy had to say this past weekend. That's a player that I'd love to see Georgia get, a player that I'm going to suggest Georgia needs for symbolic reasons, if nothing else. And right now, I'm not quite so sure that's going to be a happy ending to that story, but we'll talk about that. Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger, 3 p.m. this afternoon. Also, check out Kirby's comments on Jamari Salyer as part of our DN90 video. That's up at DawgNation.com right now or on the DawgNation video channels, including the DawgNation YouTube page. Please check that out. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews, bringing the R.S. Andrews Cool Down to us each and every day here. One of the things I like about R.S. Andrews is that when you give them a call, there aren't really kind of like bad surprises. They show up when they're supposed to. You're not afraid to let the people in the door when they knock on your front door. There's no, weird thing with the price that you don't find out later on. Oh, it's way more than you thought it was going to be. Or they did some work that you didn't ask them to do. It's all exactly the way that you'd previously discussed. It's going to make you feel confident about the relationship that you have with R.S. Andrews. So please check them out on the web at rsandrews.com, and you can get the free pathway towards everything that you want there with them. Really good stuff, rsandrews.com on that. All right, we're back tomorrow, 10 a.m. for Dog Nation Daily. Y'all have a great day. We'll look forward to seeing you then.